All right. Welcome back, everyone. We are on our third guest for today. We have Jim Zub, who is somebody that I've known for, oh boy, has it been 15 years? It's 15 years, I
We've
think.
been in the trenches for quite a while. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We,
I trying to think when I would have met you. Would that have been 2000, probably 2009, 2010 maybe?
I think 2010 is kind of like when I first
Yeah.
kind of started coming up, and I think you were about a year before me, I think,
In
in
terms
like
of writing
in
comics. Yeah,
image and yeah and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, so yeah, welcome to the our third guest here today. We're talking to Jim,
Thank you.
who's a comic book guy. He's doing Conan, he's doing D&D, but he's also,
Yeah.
I mean, you are also a dungeon master. You are also a teacher, which we were just talking about.
Yeah,
But yeah, Jim, why don't you introduce yourself? Just kind of talk a little bit
sure.
about who you are, and then we'll roll into it.
Totally. So my name's Jim Zub. I'm a Canadian, probably primarily known for writing comic books. But as you mentioned, I've been teaching for years. I've worked in animation and video games, a lot of comic books. Started in art and now am known primarily as a writer. And I love this stuff. It is an absolute joy to be able to contribute to the kinds of things I grew up on and to make my own original stories. I'm best known right now for sword and sorcery stuff, and am simultaneously working on Dungeons and Dragons, the official comic of the world's biggest and best known role playing game,
Mm.
and Conan the Barbarian, the original sword and sorcery hero, who has been around for over 90 years.
Yeah, it's wild.
And it's an absolute honor to be working on and extending the legacy of such an important. Sounds weird to say literary character, but really, like he predates Superman by I
Yeah.
think 6 years.
Really?
So it's pretty crazy. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting how it has just stuck around. Why do you think that is?
I mean, like so many characters that I mean, he birthed a genre. Like the sword and sorcery genre really takes off with the arrival of Conan in the pulps. And so, in many ways, like a lot of those characters who become icons, everything about that you think of in terms of these seminal characters, when you make a superhero story, or the that kind of singular hero, you are almost always making decisions based on Superman, whether it's intentional or you're subverting expectations in and
Right.
around a Superman character, right? No capes or whatever. That is also a
Yeah.
choice to say the default is a cape, right? Because
Yeah.
of Superman. In the same way, Conan is that iconic solitary fantasy hero, that self-made. If you say the word barbarian, instantly that is the template that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing, is a lot of the tropes and the elements that we think of as the fantasy hero, as a sword and sorcery hero, are built off of the foundation of Conan. It's not quite historical and it's not pure kind of high fantasy. It's this real amazing kind of melding of these
Yeah.
pulp kind of genres. What I jokingly call kind of low fantasy instead of high
Low fantasy.
fantasy.
Yeah, that's what I call it too. What else
Yeah,
can you call it actually? I don't
right?
know.
Like dark, mysterious, strange, survivalist kind of
Yeah.
fantasy, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the hero, that there are larger forces of gods and demons and what may have you, but they are focused on their immediate sort of
Mm.
survival, and they may never understand those greater kind of things that are moving around them or their own legend, but they are kind of awash in the story of their
Yeah.
survival, and
Like
that stuff is so cool. Yeah,
it's like whenever they encounter, it's almost like tangential to the story. Oh, there's a wizard that we killed on the way, you
right.
know?
In a sense, like Conan, what's so great about it, like again, like so many other icons, it's so easy for people to jump in. A lot of times
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, where do I start with Conan?" The good news is almost anywhere you can
Yeah.
jump in. It's like this is an alternate kind of prehistory of our world. It's a fantasy world. There is darkness and danger and mystery and magic, and where this guy shows up, amazing and exciting things are going to happen. That's
Yeah.
it. That's all you need to know. There are other elements of it, and
Hmm.
there is a history to the character, and there is a lore, and there are different eras of the character in his youth, in his prime, or when he becomes a king by his own hand. But you don't need to know any of those things in order to enjoy it. You don't
Yeah.
need to know any of those things in order to just dive in and get a damn good yarn, as they would
Yeah.
say, like a good adventure. Yeah, yeah,
Do,
it's
do
awesome.
you do you feel that mentality when you've come in to write this kind of this relaunch? It's a Titan, right?
Yeah, so Titan is the English publisher, but I
Yeah.
work directly for Heroic Signatures.
Right.
So they
Right.
are the company that has the rights to, I guess you call it the Robert E. Howard Library,
Yeah.
particularly Conan the Barbarian and everything associated with it. And
Yeah.
so working directly for the rights holders is really cool because it's just one fewer kind of layer of editorial. Like I'm talking to the people who make those decisions, and if I can get them excited, it's a go. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of the nice thing about it. And so we've got this really cool publishing plan that launched last year.
Yeah.
Our first issue, I guess, came out free comic book day 2023,
Right.
so that would have been May. And now we're just roaring forward. The full series launched over the summer. We had copies at San Diego Comic-Con last year for the premiere, and it's just been kind of moving from strength to strength. People are really enjoying it. A lot of lapsed fans have come back. A lot of new people are diving in, and
Yeah.
We're having an absolute blast.
Well,
Everyone on the team is
that's what I was gonna
really
say. Like
involved.
that, we were saying before. It's like I think every time I see anyone posting about it, like I know Fred, the guy at
Right.
Horror Exchanges, like everyone who's talking about, there's fun. People are having
There's
fun.
a lot of buzz. Yeah, it's kind of amazing because I've written Conan. This wasn't intentional, but so far I'm the only writer who's written Conan at 3 different comic book companies. So I wrote some at Dark Horse,
Right.
I've written at Marvel, and now the new one that is published through Titan.
Yeah.
And so it's not it's a weird thing because obviously I wanted it to hit big, but I thought the stuff that I did at Marvel was good and worked well. But the timing of it, when I took over the monthly book of Conan at Marvel, it was literally the pandemic was just sort of starting, and I had 2 issues come out, and then we had a 7-month gap, and it was just like bad timing. And,
Yeah.
and I think people were focused on other things for some reason, and so it was just this weird, wild time. I got this bucket list project. I got to do the ongoing adventures of this amazing character
Yeah.
that I have such a deep love for, and then it all just kind of fizzled out, and not through any lack of effort on our part, but it's just the market and the way
Yeah.
things ended up rolling, and the ability to kind of come back like lightning striking twice and getting the chance to do this again,
Yeah.
and then having such an insanely big response has been it's been a joy. It's been a
Yeah.
real it's been a pleasure. It's been a surprise, and now kind of running with it as much as I can and making the most of it,
Yeah.
and realizing that for the first time in a long time, I'm not sort of scrappily looking for little projects or miniseries or things like that. That I've got this nice long-term
Oh, that's
project
nice.
kind of foundation.
You just kind of like rest into it a little bit.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, you're not resting.
Not resting, but it's like
Yeah, it's a monthly title, man.
Yeah.
Like you know what that takes. Like
Yeah.
it at any particular point in time, you're planning 9 months or further out. You're
Yeah.
writing 6 to 7 months out. Art production is happening on 4 issues, in many cases 5 issues simultaneously, in
wow.
order to maintain that monthly schedule. We have 2 different art teams that are working on the monthly book, and so I'm kind of working staggered, where I've got issues that are being roughed out, and other issues the line art's being finished and colors are coming in and lettering's coming
Yeah.
in. It's just like, and the minute one goes out the door, another one's moving to that next
Yeah.
position in the pipeline, and
Yeah.
you just kind of get into a rhythm with it. It's
Yeah.
an insanity that you get used to. My wife and I, we do a series of books for Random House called The Young Adventurers Guide
Right,
to
yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, and they're a ton of fun and they're great to do. Traditional publishing is wonderful, and we love working with 10 Speed and Random House, our the imprint over there. Their expectations in terms of regular publishing are so far out. Like we are, planning books that are coming out end of 2025 right now.
Wow.
And that's just traditional publishing.
Yeah.
We're going to have the manuscript done, and there will still be 10 to 12 months before release.
Wow.
That's just the nature of the thing. And when I try and describe to them comic book production, monthly comic book production, they just think we're all crazy. They think we're all insane.
Dude.
Because why would you work, why are you throwing train tracks in front of a moving train like that? But that's just how it works. You kind of
Yeah.
it's terrifying but kind of amazing. Like
Yeah.
I hate it, and yet I kind of love that we just sent that sucker off to print, and whatever, 4 weeks later
Yeah.
it'll be in your hands, and here comes another one. Like it makes you fleet of foot. It makes you have to be adaptable, and you have to be
Yeah.
constantly thinking, and I was talking to Ron Mars, the comic book writer.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot of video game writing now, and
I
he
was just
said a
going to talk
lot.
about video game writing, but go ahead.
Yeah, but he said, the skills that he built up in comics and in the constant demand and the output have made him really good in all these other areas. That he can really surprise clients with how
Yep.
quick he can pull an idea together, or how much he can synthesize other people's stuff, or pump material out on a tight deadline.
Yep.
And he doesn't think of it as being highly stressful, because compared to monthly comics, it's not that bad.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like when I moved to Stockholm, I went to work at Ubisoft, and I remember like my first couple weeks there, I was reading the material, getting familiar with it, and I did a little write-up summary of like, here's how we could fix it. They did a read on the Monday, and they were like, yeah, this is really good. Can you make these changes? Sure. I came back 2 hours later. I'm like, here they are. And they're like, that was your work for the week. I was like, oh. And it's like, that's
You're like, wait a minute.
it was so jarring, man. I was like, really?
Yeah.
And that pace, I was like, same thing. It's like, I kept on telling them, hire comic book artists, man. They do all of it. They do storyboarding.
Yeah.
They do
Yeah.
world building. They just hire them. They're 10 times
Location,
faster,
design.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They love doing it too. I remember
Exactly.
I'm working with Sean Isaac on the new Thunderbolts book, and he was just like, "Are we allowed to, design new costumes?" And our editor's like, "Well, I don't know that you have time." He's like, I need to." And it's like, "Oh yeah, free character design, free costume design."
Yeah.
Like these artists are they're willing to roll through broken glass. They want to
Yeah.
make their mark on this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing thing. Like the passion that you work with teams like that and people like that.
Yeah.
And you don't always see that, even in other creative vocations. I think.
It's true. So let's I know a bit about your background, and like you grew up in Toronto, correct? Like
just outside Toronto.
Just outside
so
Toronto,
there's a little blue collar city called Oshawa.
Right.
So it's the General Motors plant is there. That's our major kind of economy there. There's a few comic book creators who have come from Oshawa, actually. Ed Brisson.
Didn't he just release a book about?
He just released a book that's set in Oshawa. Yeah.
And I saw he got a letter from the mayor.
Yes. So I mean, Oshawa doesn't get a lot of screen time, or no one gives a damn.
Yeah,
it's like that wider. Whenever Canada's we see ourselves in any kind of media, even if it's negative, we're like, yay, someone remembered Canada exists. Yeah. It's like Oshawa's the microcosm of that. Within Ontario, you're like, what, Oshawa? When someone says, oh, so you've been to the Schwa, and they're like, we exist. That's amazing. So I grew up in Oshawa. I didn't know Ed or anything growing up, but
okay.
It had a deeply nerdy kind of population. Like when I was a kid, there were 3 comic book stores in this town of city of under 100,000 people. So like
crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty nuts. A lot of nerdity, a lot of tabletop role-playing games, a lot of video games, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Most of my love of these things comes from my older brother. He was my proto nerd. So he was 4 years older than me, and he was into, all the stuff. He was into computers, and he was into video games, and he read a lot more sci-fi, but he read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. And then 4 years doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. There's a gap there that, especially that split between, elementary school and high school.
Yeah.
You're like 2 different kind of places.
Yeah.
And so we kind of bonded over Dungeons and Dragons. That was a huge thing for us. I started playing when I was 8 years old, and he would have been 12. And trying to figure out how that game worked, and it made it even harder because I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but there are multiple versions of Dungeons and Dragons. So we had like the regular basic set, but then we also had some of the advanced D&D books, and they sound the same, but they're just different enough. Plus the game was not super well organized, and we would just play. We would just play like crazy. We'd play with my older cousins, but we'd play just a lot on our own. And it became a bridge for us to kind of communicate, and a way for us to tell stories together. And making Joe laugh was like the greatest thing ever. Like it was like entertainment fuel for me. If I could catch him or my friends or my cousins off guard, because I was small and I was really scrawny, and so we couldn't really play sports stuff, and even video games, like they had way better hand-eye coordination. But every turn in D&D, I get to tell you what I'm going to do, and I get to roll the dice, right? Yeah. And so if I come up with a really fun idea, or I crack up the table, it's like I'm one of the older boys. Like that was really addictive to me.
Interesting.
Really powerful.
Do you think
And
that's where
so,
your love of story really started? Do you think?
yeah, I think that
Yeah.
my desire to entertain, like
Yeah.
that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Okay.
read a lot of stories and I loved, art and animation, all that stuff and comics, but like that ability to like get feedback, like I'm putting something out into the world and then people are responding to it.
Yeah.
That was where that started. And just being a goofball kind of in general, like we grew up, we would listen to stand-up comedians and then you would memorize them, or we would watch a Monty Python movie and then
Yeah.
you like reproducing it to try and get the same laughter, do you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
get the inflections right and everything else, that addictive kind of quality of performance and storytelling and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And so I didn't know what form it would take. Like if you would have asked me as a kid what I would do, I wouldn't have said been a comic book writer, that's for
Yeah.
sure. I would have, I had a lot of different kind of creative things bouncing around. At one point, I would have said I wanted to be a stage magician. Like I was really,
Really?
yeah, with magic. And,
Did you
and
actually do that when you were a kid?
I did. I did some sleight of hand stuff and I
Oh, that's
practiced those
amazing.
things for quite a while. I have a funny little side story about that. When I first met Paul Dini, uh, I was thrilled to meet him and Bruce Timm the same kind of weekend at this Calgary Comic Expo.
Yeah.
But I was way more intimidated to meet Paul's wife, who's Misty Lee, who's a pretty famous magician. Because to me, still, there's a very much an exciting quality to that. Like the magician sort of stuff was really
Interesting.
awesome, like very, very mysterious and amazing.
Yeah.
It was just funny stuff like that. Like growing up, yeah, magicians I thought were really, really neat, and stand-up comedians, and
Hmm.
that ability to public speaking and putting yourself out there and engaging and entertaining people
Yeah.
in a very immediate kind of way. But storytelling and writing and art. And then when I kind of quieted down from that kind of class clown sort of exuberant person that I was in, I guess, elementary school, then I started to do more art and writing and things like that. So
Yeah.
through high school, that sort of took hold even more so.
Hmm.
And then I started to see myself, in different ways. And then I wanted to get into animation, classical, old school kind of Disney style animation. Um, and that's what I went to school for. I went to school for classical animation. I was at Sheridan College. I was in the last group that shot on film, so I felt like a
Oh, wow.
movie dinosaur. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And digital had already taken hold. They were just, I don't know, they were just sloppy about not updating their equipment, and so we were just the vestigial last group that was shooting on traditional film or whatever.
That's
It
cool.
was ridiculous. Sort of. I
Where
mean, we
was
kind
that?
of knew.
Was that in
That was
Ontario?
at, yeah, Sheridan. So it's in
Yeah.
Oakville, just outside
Oakville.
Toronto.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I had taken a year of film and multimedia, and I was, because I didn't get in. There's quite the school is pretty famous for their animation program,
Yeah.
and so I applied from high school. I was, one of the better artists at my high school, and I didn't get in. And then I took a year of film at Humber, and that's where I learned how to write a screenplay and a script, and I learned basic cinematography.
Oh,
stuff
nice.
like that. And then I applied again to animation, didn't get in, and I took a year of art, I guess art fundamentals, art intensive or whatever. And so like focusing again on my drawing, because I
Mm.
had been, when I didn't get in, I should have just kept practicing, but it was like a little bit of a moral, kind of
Yeah.
like a morale
Yeah.
punch. And so I came back at it, and then I finally got into the program that I wanted to do, and was doing art, and thought in my head, I was like, oh, I'm going to end up living in California or Florida and work on Disney movies or whatever. And midway through the program, all the traditional animation kind of died and digital was coming in. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh, maybe maybe you don't get to dream you're going to be an astronaut and then end up on the moon. Like maybe there's, you have to make alternate kind of moves.
Right.
And that was very much at the heart of figuring out what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
What was just trying to realize what parts of the dream were the most important. And storytelling was actually the core of the whole thing. I thought it was drawing, or I thought it was working for a particular company, but it's always been the storytelling aspect of it.
Right.
It's always been that engagement and that entertainment and that joy that can kind of bring,
How old were you at the time when you kind of hit that?
I mean, we're talking, well, so I leave the animation program and I go off, and a group of us tried to start our own company. So I'm 23, 24.
Wow.
and that was stupid.
What
But
was what
amazing.
was the company about? What happened
Well,
there?
I wasn't even a founder. It was like a friend of mine and a group of his friends in Alberta. They were trying to start their own animation studio.
Wow.
And one of the kind of hubris that you can only have when you're 23 and you don't know what the hell you're doing, where you're like, there's no animation studios in Calgary. We could be the first. Instead of going, why are there no animation studios in Calgary? Because there's no need for an animation studio in Calgary and no one wants one, or there's no market for it.
Yeah.
We were just like, we'll be the first. And so it was just this amazing kind of, ludicrous thing that you do. And sometimes those things you take those long shots and they're
Exactly. Yeah.
incredibly successful. But other times you run into the inevitability of reality.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot, and it was I met some really really key people to my life, and that was the first time that I actually started teaching was out in Alberta.
Oh wow. Okay, I didn't know
First,
that.
just literally as uh, the opportunity came up, and I needed to make some money because the studio was in kind of financial straits, and so I started teaching part time at a school there, and that was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
And again, there was this storytelling element to it. There was this engagement to it. And instead of it just being pure entertainment, it was like watching the light bulb turn on with people and go, I've taught you something and now you will be better at it going forward. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And that was really, I do still really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And it's something that is really invaluable. And when people go off, if you do a good job as a teacher, you have a formative effect on people's lives and they remember you very fondly. And it's a responsibility that
Mm-hmm.
I take very seriously and I really, really enjoy. And so it's this weird thing where it's all storytelling. Teaching is storytelling and writing is storytelling and art is storytelling. It all ties into the same kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It all feeds from that same kind of wellspring for me. It's just which ones are the most kind of fulfilling or which
Right.
ones have got me engaged, and that's kind of been a fun kind of quest. And I could say fun because things are going well right now. When it's not going well, it doesn't feel fun. It doesn't. And because you care so deeply about the work and you care so deeply about your own personal involvement with this stuff, um, it hurts a lot more. Like,
Yeah.
not to downplay anyone else's kind of job. Everyone's jobs are difficult. But, like one of my buddies, he works in a warehouse and he doesn't live for that job. It is very much like pay the bills and live on the weekends or live on holidays and things like
Yeah.
that. And that is a totally valid way to carry out your life
Yeah.
and your career. And at the end of the day, he can completely divorce himself from the job.
Right.
Whereas we've got these tethers that just like hold us constantly. We're constantly thinking about it, and it's constantly on our minds. And
Yeah.
our self actualization and ego is tied up in whether or not people like it and whether we're proud of it and whether we think that we've done all that
Yeah.
we can do to make it successful.
Well,
Which is a whole other aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always wanted to ask you this question. We were talking a bit before about your teaching career, and
Mhm.
I've kind of watched over the years. You teach. You're working on. I don't even know how many books. It's like it's always an incredible amount.
Thanks.
And then you're also doing like prose with the D&D adventure books for kids. Like,
Yeah.
how have you managed over, I guess, the last 15 years to like keep all that going, and you still have an incredible energy, and maybe,
Right.
like how have you managed to do that? I've always been fan, and when I talk about you to people, I just like, how on earth does he do it? I'm genuinely impressed, man.
So the practical version of this, like if you want to get down to earth on it, so I don't have any kids and I don't have any pets, and that's not to say that those things are undesirable. It's just like the way my life ended up turning out.
Yeah.
Right? So people were like, "How do you travel so much?" Well, I'm like, "Well, I don't have to worry about putting whatever a dog in the kennel or
Right.
We just get up and go. Like
Yeah.
when we need to go, we go. And the same thing with kids. And there's absolutely nothing wrong. People love my nieces and my cousins' kids and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it wasn't in the cards for my wife and I. And
Yeah.
so we sort of leaned in and said, okay, if that is not a thing that we're doing, then these other things take on different sort of levels. I've got, when it comes to this sort of stuff, I guess it's a classic kind of extrovert sort of trait in the sense that, some people, the more they interact with things or with people, it drains their batteries. And generally, the more I'm interacting with people and things, the more it actually charges my batteries.
Yeah.
And so it's that weird thing where I take on a project, and if I'm passionate about it, it just drives itself. Like, oh, okay, this is awesome, and if we do that, that means this. And then the artist hands an artwork and you go, well, damn, we got to go further. Like, now look at this thing. We got to take it this way and there. And so it's this sort of like perpetual energy machine where I'm constantly getting pumped and getting excited about what's coming next and the possibilities inherent in it. When things are going bad, that can be tough because it's like a vortex that pulls you the other way. You're like, why isn't this working?
Right.
Why? But when it goes well, it just like drives you to want to do the stuff. I think it's also, there was a period of years between, although you met me when I was starting to sort of make my mark in terms of writing.
Yeah.
I was in the comic industry since 2001, depending on how you want to look at it. Because I did a web comic first, and then I started working at the Udon studio.
Udon, right? Right,
as an artist I mean, it's amazing to me now that people don't know about this part of my career because it seemed like it was going to be the biggest, most important thing. Because I became a project manager, and I was, depending on how you want to measure it, sort of the number 2 guy at the studio.
Yeah.
It was Eric Coe, who ran Udon, and he was doing the majority of the publishing things and some of the client stuff, and then I was running most of what we called client services. So that was putting art teams together to do concept art or illustration or, you know, comic work or storyboards or just you name it.
Yeah.
And we were doing dozens and dozens of projects at any point. And through the Udon studio, I learned so much about how to run a project, how to stay organized, how to motivate and work with artists, how to work with clients, how to run convention stuff, marketing and publishing and pre-press and contracts and just all these things that you never would have gotten, you know, through any sort of formal, normal education. But the one thing that I wasn't doing is I wasn't fulfilling that creative, you know, desire.
Yeah.
And I had, for years when I was at the Udon studio, I made good money and I met so many amazing people and I was traveling and going to all these conventions. And so there was this little thing in the back of my mind that's like, this is everything you wanted. And it's like, no, it wasn't. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to create, but I was sort of I was running parallel to those things and I was getting to go to all those events. Right. So how the hell could I complain? How could I possibly, you know, and I'm paying down my student loans and I got a mortgage and I bought a house and I was like, I am living a nerd creative lifestyle. But the one thing I wasn't doing was I wasn't telling stories anymore. I wasn't doing the act of storytelling. Every so often a project would come in and a client would need some amount of writing. And I would always just like jump on it like a grenade. You guys don't know what this thing is? I'll write the ad copy for that. Yeah. They're like, oh, we can find some. No. And I was just like, have to do it because
just so hungry.
The smallest bit of creative. Or someone's like, oh, they're not gonna be able to deliver this thing. I'll do it. And I just like jump into any sort of writing end of things. But not very often. They didn't come in. It was mostly art production, you know what I mean? And then it's funny, one of the guys you're working with, Joe Keating, he reached out to an artist named Chris Stevens. And Chris had done a bunch of amazing artwork. Some not very much comic stuff, but a lot of illustration-y kind of stuff. But he had been posting all these amazing pinups of comic stuff. And Joe reached out to him and asked him to do a story for Pop Gun, which was anthology of just different things. And I was Chris's boss at the Udon studio, and we worked together on dozens and dozens of projects. I was keeping him afloat in terms of his rent and stuff like that.
Nice.
And Chris contacted me out of the blue, and he said, I've got this offer to do this comic thing. Is that okay? And I said, well, hey, you're not on an exclusive contract. I mean, if you're still hitting our deadlines, you can do whatever you want, man. But what is this? I'm excited for you because we're friends. And he said, oh, I don't know. They just told me it's this comic thing and I get to, draw. And I was like, great. Well, let me know how it goes. And like a couple days later, he contacts me and he goes, I thought they were going to send me a script. They told me I could do whatever I want. And I was just like, what? And he goes, yeah, it's this like free for all kind of anthology and all this stuff. I said, what are you going to do? And he goes, I have no idea. And so over the phone, we just chatted and he was talking about doing a sword and sorcery thing. And he was saying, but I don't want it to be like, guy kills a dragon, saves a princess kind of stuff. And I don't want it to be just be like, the hero of destiny sort of stuff. And so we just started joking on the phone, and we just blew a bunch of weird. I said, well, they should be like heartless mercenary bastards or whatever. We were just joking around. And by the end of it, there had been this little kind of brainstorm of stupid stuff. And he laughed, and I said, well, give me a special thanks or whatever, go make this thing.
Yeah.
And a couple days after that, he contacted me again, and he goes, I tried to write down a bunch of the stuff we talked about, and it sucked. And he goes, but when we talked on the phone, it was really funny. Why don't you just write this thing?
Oh, nice.
And so I said, man, that would be great. And I poured myself into these 10 pages of this short story, and that's 2 copper pieces. That's the original Skullkickers.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was your first taste was.
That was my first writing.
Writing.
I'd done my own, for someone else like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
He illustrated the hell out of it, and it looked awesome. And then Eric Larson was publisher at Image at the time. He saw the pages come in, and he contacted me because Joe had been interfacing with me on getting the pages.
Yeah.
And Larson was like, I don't know who the hell you guys are, but this is amazing.
Wow.
You guys want to do more? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And then I contacted Chris, said, do you want to do more? And he goes, I can't do more. That almost killed me. And I was like, no, it'll go great. And I just realized how excited I was about making stuff. And it took a while to get it all to sort of come together. But we finally, Edwin ended up stepping in to do the artwork because Chris was doing these fully painted things, and there's no way he would be able to do a full series like this.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff. But Skullkickers was this, I joked with you about this before, the most expensive hobby I've ever had. It didn't make good money, but I was doing something creative. And for the first time ever, people would see me at conventions and they would be like, I like your book, or, this is great, or whatever, instead of just like, we want to hire your guys, or, let's talk business, or, and then nothing against the Udon guys. Everyone at Udon was amazing. But it was just like, it just felt so awesome to be able to be making things again and to be telling stories, and for people to, just be responding to that in any kind of way, shape, or form. And so even when the book wasn't profitable, I was just like pouring other money I was making into making the book.
Wow.
Because I just wanted to keep putting it out there. And I had a moment where did you go to Image Expo the first year they ran that Image Expo? I think it was
I think so. I think I did.
The
yeah,
20th
it was.
anniversary of Image.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did go to that.
Yeah. So they did a gallery show the first night of Image Expo.
Right. Yep.
And there was like all this original artwork up, and then everyone, all the creators were there, and we all had cocktails, and we're all walking around pretending we're fancy and looking at framed artwork and having conversations. And Robert Kirkman is there, and he's looking at a piece of artwork he didn't recognize, and I came over and I was chatting with him, and then he pulls me off to one side and he goes, "Hey man, I know your numbers." And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, you're one of, sure, that doesn't surprise me. And he goes, no, you're not doing good on that book. Why do you keep soliciting issues? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you just gotta like cut bait and do another concept. And I was like, what? I can't do that. He goes, what do you mean? I said, how do I know that the next thing I pitch is even gonna get picked up? And he goes, no, like you're good. Like you could just pitch more stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll get published. And I was just like, no, but I really want to do this thing. And he goes, do you think I didn't want to do more, like a tech jacket, or like more, like I had all sorts of concepts I threw against the wall. And then finally, Invincible and Walking Dead were the ones that clicked. He goes, you've got lots of ideas, right? So just keep throwing things. I was like, okay, but I'm going to do this too. And he goes, no, but that is a terrible financial idea. You should just be wrapping this up and trying to hit with something else.
Yeah.
And he wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
But I was just going to stubbornly kind of see it through. And that was just the nature of the wherewithal of the thing. And to his credit, when we wrapped up Skullkickers at issue 34, and I think we stopped being profitable around, I want to say issue 11.
Wow.
He sent me a little congratulations note, and he's like, hey man, you really did it your way, and I'm proud of you. And I was like, oh, that's nice, probably
Yeah.
stupid, but yeah, did it my
Well,
way.
it's funny.
Yeah.
We were talking just before as well, like how, hey, maybe that's how this all came around, because I mean that
Oh,
was
totally.
your first voice as a
It
writer
was the
in the
calling card.
industry,
Yeah.
and then people kind of knew, and because you also talked a lot openly about your D&D and growing up as
Hmm.
a kid playing it, and now it's kind of come back around, and now
I
you're
mean, it's
literally writing
insane
D&D
to
and
me.
Conan.
Yeah, it's the two of the biggest properties in fantasies, like from my cold dead fingers kind of thing. Like, it's crazy to me because when Skullkickers came out, like fantasy books were not a thing
Yeah,
at the time, and especially in comics. Comedy books were not a thing.
yeah,
Like it was like Us and Chew. That was like it.
yeah,
And so we were kind of counter programming, not intentionally. It was just I wanted to make the book, that I wanted to make.
yeah,
But it's so weird now seeing D&D in the mainstream in such
yeah.
an insane way, and how huge it is, and the way that I was able to inadvertently be on the ground floor when the fifth edition stuff
Hmm.
launched. You got it's so bizarre to me. Like in 2014, when the only reason I started writing the D&D comics was because I asked to, not because it was offered to me. They weren't going to make more D&D comics. IDW had, I think it was called like the Hasbro Master License, which is at the time
Okay.
they had, Transformers, GI
Yeah,
Joe, they had Gem and the Holograms, and just anything
yeah.
Hasbro related. And of course D&D's under that broader umbrella. And I had done the Samurai Jack book, and it
Right,
had
I
done
remember
quite
that.
well. It was supposed to be a mini series, and then it got extended out to an ongoing, and people really liked it, and it was a lot of fun. And so Ted Adams, who was owner of IDW at the time, he saw me at a convention, and he said, "I love the Samurai Jack book, and I just think you're doing a great job. Is there any other properties that you want to write here at IDW?" And I said, "Well, either Turtles or Dungeons and Dragons." And he goes, "Well, Kevin Eastman's coming back to Turtles, and no offense, that guy's kind of got priority." And he goes, "But you don't want to do D&D." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "No one gives a shit about D&D." And on top of that, it's a dead property, and Wiz the Coast is incredibly hard to work with. They're one of the most difficult clients we've ever worked with. So it's like doesn't make good money, and it's hard to get approved. And I was like, oh, and I was so bummed. And he goes, "But I get that this is something." I said, "You have no idea. It's like D&D changed my life, and it's one of
Yeah.
my favorite things." And he kind of goes, "Okay, like for you, we can try and set up a call, and just you do a conference call, and you'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean." I was like, "Okay," and then we'll figure out something else. And I get on this conference call with the Wiz of the Coast people, and they're not a difficult client. You just have to be speaking their language. And I
That's what
grew
I
up
was
on
gonna
this
say.
stuff,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah,
know. And so the minute we did a call, and they were like, "Oh, Jim really knows this stuff. Like he loves this stuff. It's
yeah,
deep in his bone marrow." You know what I mean? That helped a lot. And then they were developing the fifth edition stuff and getting ready to launch. And it was sort of like, look, if you're going to do a new comic, this is the best time because there's a whole new initiative.
yeah,
They're going to be releasing a new version of the game. This is when it's going to have maximum potential impact. And so it was this weird thing where that was just the right time. And I asked for it at the right time when the license was available.
Hmm.
And then fifth edition has become the biggest edition of D&D ever,
Yeah.
and I just sort of held on like as the rocket kind of went off. And a year or two later, people were like, "How did you get that gig?" And I was like, "No one wanted it, no one cared, but I always cared. I always wanted to do it." And
Yeah.
that made all the difference in that key moment. You hear about this all the time, like Claremont comes on the X-Men when it's considered a dead book and it's going to be
That's
canceled
wild.
or whatever, and you're like, "No one cares, but I care," and you're just
Yeah.
like, you're just in the right place at the right time, and you're passionate about the thing, and thankfully it worked out. And
Yeah.
now I don't just do the D&D comics. I've done these other book series and
Yeah, how did that happen?
consulting.
How did that? I was always curious how that lined up. Like, how did
Yeah,
that whole?
that was hilarious. So my editor at IDW is wonderful, John Barber. He was amazing, but he was not a D&D guy. And that was great because he would read the story outlines and the pitches and the material, and he could look at it from the outside and go, "Does this make sense as good story?"
Yeah.
Like if someone just picks this up and they don't know anything about D&D, are they going to get an enjoyable experience?
Yeah.
And that was important. But whenever we talked about specifics, he had nothing to offer because he didn't know the property at all. And so the licensed the person it was going to at Wizards for approval they were seeing all my outline material and they were commenting. And then John sort of, I think, got sick of just doing the back and forth. And so just started to CC us all together on emails. Because that way we were just interfacing directly anyway.
Yeah.
And so the guy, Adam Lee, he was one of the heads of narrative over at Wizards. He just realized how passionate I was about it, how much I knew about it, how much, just off camera, how many books I've got, like just the insane library of D&D shit that I have. And he was like, oh, Jim's really bone deep into this stuff. And I was constantly throwing new things into it, or asking questions, or asking about what was coming down the line so that we could tie in our comic plans with their publishing plans. And they loved that passion and that kind of integration. And so we just started interfacing more and more directly. And then he was like, I had a meeting and your name came up for this other project. Is this something you might be interested in? And so we just started working together directly. And then I just started doing consulting. I just started to and then every time I would go to Seattle for Emerald City Comic Con, I would come in a day or two early and just go up to the office. And the first time you do that, you're like, oh man, it's the mothership. You wander around the office and people in their cubicles working away on the books, and you signed the NDA so you can just see artwork up everywhere, new stuff that hasn't been announced yet. And I'm giddy. And
I was gonna say it must have been like this wild moment as a kid, so cool to go, here I am at the Empire.
Yeah, they have this neat thing. I don't know if they still do it, but for a while they were hiring. They would have what they call a creative consultant. So for every major source book, they would bring in at least one person outside of their regular system just to shake things up, to come up with new ideas. And so it wasn't the same voices saying the same thing every time. And so Adam was developing a book eventually it was called Descent into Avernus.
Right.
And they called me in, and I went to the office for like 5 days and stayed at a hotel like a block away from the office and just whiteboarded tons of material.
Cool.
And what's fascinating about that is it was the book that was in development as they signed the deal to do Baldur's Gate 3.
Right.
And so the Larian guys were basically like, what is current D&D? Give us all the latest stuff. And they were like, here's the latest stuff, like right hot off the presses, in development on it. And that's why there's so much of the hell material in Baldur's Gate.
I was going to say,
And there's material that I distinctly came up with that is in the video game, but not because I worked for Larian, but because I was working for D&D. So there's this concept in the game of these things called soul coins, which are like the infernal currency, and I came up with that in the office.
Oh, cool.
We were trying to figure out how contracts work in hell, like all this weird stuff that we came up with. And so there's this weird kind of bleed over with this now, huge current game that you got, whatever, 5-6 years ago was just a twinkle in someone's eye kind of thing, which was super fun.
That is fun.
Yeah, it's been such a neat kind of a ride in that way. I love working on the D&D stuff. I love that now, I'm in a very weird position that I never ever want to take for granted, where I'm picking the projects I want to do more than just waiting sort of at the trough for whatever's kind of coming down.
Did you feel like you were in that spot for a while, like you were just trying to always?
I mean, there's always a point, and early in your creative career, you're just trying to pay off bills. You're trying to make money in a creative industry. Yeah. You're trying to gain legitimacy. And the easiest way to gain legitimacy is sheer credits, right? The more I do, the more contacts I make, the more trust, the more, whatever. And so you're like the eager beaver and you're just running around doing whatever you're told. And that's amazing. It's a really good, when people think of you fondly and they know they can rely on you, but you get called a lot. You get called to clean up a lot of messes, and you get called to create connective tissue, and I was doing one-shots and miniseries and weird projects that other people had ditched, or here's an outline for a thing and so and so got fired, and make something worthy out of this, and it is very stressful, and it is very difficult, and you learn a lot working within these systems. But I was hitting a point where I was burning out because I was teaching full-time and I was writing between 5 and 6 comics a month.
I don't know how you did that, man. That is wild.
In the sense that I loved it, like it was enjoyable. Every day was this challenge where you'd be on emails and conference calls, and you're saving the day, and you're pulling stuff out of the fire, and it can feel really good. But I would be coming back from conventions, and I would be like an exhausted mess, or you just realize you're not spending time with your loved ones or your friends, and months were going by,
Yeah.
and you would, instead of it being like crunch time, like, okay, this weekend's going to be bad, it's like, okay, this 6 month period's going to be bad. And you're like, well, then that's just a normal life now. Like, that is no
Yeah.
crunch time. That is the schedule. And the schedule would be, I would go to school and teach, come home, have dinner with my wife, go up to my office, close the door. And then sometimes she'd still be awake when I would go to bed,
That's tough, man.
every single
Yeah.
night. And you have this deep feeling of, this isn't the right word. I don't know what word to use. Guilt. Because if someone, I know a lot of people were trying to make their way into this industry, trying to break in, trying to get a toehold. And I was being offered amazing projects. And so there's this feeling of, well, I can't turn that down. Well, I can't turn that down. Well, so-and-so needs me or this, and so you will just flay yourself alive to prove yourself and to make everybody happy except yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was hitting this weird point in 2018 where I was like, oh, I'm burning out. Like, I can feel I'm losing it. Like, I'm not passionate about this stuff. I'm just barely getting these things over the line, and I can do this to a competent level, but I'm just going to crumble in terms of my ability to, have a life. And my relationship is suffering, and my time is suffering, and my health is not good because I'm eating garbage all the time, and on a plane and all this kind of stuff. And it's an exciting jet setty kind of lifestyle, and on social media you're taking the selfies with whatever cosplayers, and you're in a new city every couple of weeks. So how can you complain? You know what I mean? Like, and so it's this weird sort of moment where I inadvertently, the original plan was in 2020 I was going to step away from teaching and just focus on writing and see if that would pull it back together. And then the whole world spun off its axis, and I got the answer in, don't go anywhere, don't do anything. And all of a sudden a bunch of projects got canceled, and there wasn't something waiting in the wings. And then it was really nice. Like, it was very weird and calm. And like, the world was in a terrible state, and I am scared for the future, but also kind of like, oh, I stepped off the merry-go-round. Oh, that's kind of okay. You know what I mean? And if I get on, I'm going to get on very carefully and kind of know what this is next time.
But what was that period like for you? Like, when you kind of fell into that?
Weird. I felt guilty again because I could just stay home, because I had a couple little creative projects and I was teaching online. So I'd wake up in the morning, and Stacy and I would have, a cup of tea and breakfast, and then I'd go up to my office and I'd do my classes. And instead of having to travel to campus or, I just camera off, I'm home. Well, I guess I'm going to cook something for dinner. So I would take lavish attention.
I saw that. I saw you started posting a lot of your meals and stuff. We could talk a little bit about that. Like, what happened there? Was that just a way to kind of calm your mind, or?
It's so weird. I was a terrible cook. I never learned how to cook anything growing up. And so when I left home and I moved away, I was just eating out or eating terribly all the time. But I always wanted to cook. Like, my mom's a good cook. My grandma's a good cook. My aunt is a fantastic cook. And I lived with my aunt and uncle for a year. And my aunt in particular, I was super inspired because she would go to work, and she had a corporate job. She would come home and she would just look through the fridge and go, oh, I'm going to make this. And she would just whip up amazing things while you'd be chatting with her about
such a skill, man. Yeah.
It is a skill.
It's crazy.
I was like amazed. And she could entertain, and she would be like, oh, people are coming over Saturday. I'm just going to walk over to the butcher's and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to make that. And boom. And I was like, wow, that's what adults do. I want to be an adult, And so I learned how to cook some things, and I could cook okay.
Yeah.
But the pandemic inadvertently was like, well, you can stare at the news and get more depressed, or you can do something. And so, once you've cleaned and you've reorganized and you've done whatever, I was like, oh, I want to learn how to cook these things, or restaurant food that I'm missing because we would normally go out. I wonder if I can make that. I wonder if I can make, really high quality, whatever, steak or pasta. burgers or fish and chips, and then I started, once those went well and I was like, oh, I added these to my kind of repertoire, then I started to get more kind of ambitious with it.
Hmm.
Stacy and I did a lot of traveling to Japan, like when I was doing Wayward, which
I
is
remember that. Yeah.
set in Japan. I would go to Japan once or twice a year,
Oh, wow.
and so we, for research, right? And so and Steven was living over there, the artist that I collaborated with, and so we got a chance to visit him, and we would do events and signings and stuff. But it was also just, we loved going, we loved
Yeah.
traveling, and we loved the food. And so then I started to get ambitious, like, I want to learn how to cook some of this stuff. Is that even possible? And it's like, of course it's possible. And with enough practice, I learned, added a bunch of those dishes to my repertoire, and that gave me a lot of confidence. The first time I made, it sounds so simple. There's this Japanese dish called chicken karage, which
Yeah.
is just like Japanese fried
Yep.
chicken. But the best stuff is so good, and the batter is this light and crunchy and very flavorful kind of chicken. It tastes different from Southern fried chicken and all these other kinds. And I have some really strong sense memories around certain foods. And my wife and I, we did our honeymoon in Japan, and
Nice.
there was a night where we're just sitting around, this like tapas bar, looking out on a balcony over the city, and we're having beers and we're eating this fried chicken, and and I missed that so much. And I was like, I want that.
Hmm.
And the world is falling apart. I want that feeling again. And so I think I tried cooking chicken like 6 times in maybe like 3 weeks, trying to get the right
Yeah.
recipe. And I'm following the first time I did a bunch of substitutions like an idiot. And then the second time I was like, I went to the Asian grocery store and I got all the real things and I followed the ingredients and all the stuff, and it still didn't taste right.
Yeah.
And a few times I tried it more carefully and I still screwed it up. And I was like, it can't be this. Like, how am I missing it? And then I was talking to a friend of mine, and he had actually worked at a Japanese like tapas bar, like an izakaya, and he told me, he goes, oh, this is what we do, and I thought our chicken was the best, and he gave me a couple little technique, and then I put those into it, and there was this stupid moment where my wife and I made the chicken. It looked good, but the last couple batches had looked good. And we sat down and we took one bite, and then we looked at each other and we were like, oh, oh, we're home. Oh, we did it,
That's
And
amazing.
the minute I added that to my repertoire, I was like, oh, maybe I kind of love to cook.
That's
And
awesome.
people will joke with me and they say, oh, when are you going to do a cookbook or whatever? And the answer is never, because not everything should be a hustle. Not everything needs to be a paying
Yes.
gig.
Absolutely.
And
That's
I
awesome.
get to choose when I cook. It's not for money. You know what I mean? And that's the important thing.
Yeah, man. I
To
think
have those outlets.
that's such a really good point, man. I think it's such a danger, even like when we're starting this what we're doing with Fast Vision and everything. Shannon and I, who's like a partner, especially with like the social media stuff. Like we tried this
Sure.
like 8 years ago to do like a Twitch thing, and I know a couple people that went down that road and it didn't. They're like, I don't ever want to do that
Right.
again. And it's so you have to really be careful about balancing that. We have a daughter. We want to help artists, but we also have to
Yep.
keep that balance.
Well,
Actually,
and it will keep you vibrant longer if you do
Yes,
that properly.
exactly.
Instead of just, and it sounds weird because it's like, I definitely burned hard at the start. And there are times when you need to sprint, and I tell
Yeah.
students all the time, I'm like, there are going to be all-nighters, there are going to be difficult times, but you can't, hard burn all the time. That's not how
Well,
it's
actually, we got a question for you, actually, which is right
Oh,
in line
cool.
with that.
Perfect.
Do you have advice to up and comers to avoid taking on too many projects at once, or how to avoid burnout after your own experiences?
I mean, the most valuable skill you learn early in your career, or you need to learn early in your career, is the truth of your own productivity. And not what you can do when the stars are in perfect alignment, but when you actually can dependably do. So if I tell a client, you're going to have this thing Monday, it's not because I'm rolling through broken glass every single weekend. It's because like I can conceivably do that. I will give myself more time than what I need,
Yeah.
and then I can reasonably deliver. You know what I mean? And you have to be able to accurately measure that. There is something very potent about saying this is 3 hours worth of work. And sometimes it's 2 hours, but it will definitely be done in 3. Do you know what I mean? And that, being able to parcel that time properly and know that you're doing it. And you end up scheduling yourself. And I tell my students this all the time, that they have to schedule breaks as well. They have to schedule in fun stuff. And they sort of joke about that. And I go, I know it sounds weird to
Yeah.
have a to-do list that includes call your mother and do your laundry, but like those are things that you need to put in there, or see your friends, or hey, it's so and so's birthday and I'm blocking out this chunk of time
Mm.
for this important social thing, or these things that I want to do.
Yeah.
um, and so you do end up having to be organized and scheduled, but it means that when you're doing what you set out to do, and you know dependably you can do what you say you're going to do, you sleep better. So
Mm.
you don't have that anxiety
Yeah.
of, oh God, I'm screwing up, oh God, I'm falling behind,
Right.
because you'll never feel good. Like even when I was burning out, I was still delivering. Like in front of the curtain, everything looked good. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like I was ditching deadlines and
Right.
making mistakes. Um, but I could just see that I had stacked it so tight, and it's like I can do all the things I promised, but this is relentless. Like
Yeah.
and again, there's that weird feeling of so many other people are trying to make it. How dare you say no? How dare you turn down projects? How dare you not be appreciative of what you have?
Do you
You're like, no,
still
no.
do you still feel that way?
Um, I'm better now. Like,
Yeah.
I walked away from a project, which I've only done maybe twice in my entire career. Um, but it was because the person in charge of the license had changed.
Hmm.
And so the approvals, we literally had stuff that was finished and approved that was unapproved. And then we were being told to start from scratch. And I was
Hmm.
like, well, this isn't being done in good faith anymore. Like,
Yeah.
actually, I don't think you even want this thing to be created anymore. I think this is a vestigial limb that you wish was being lopped off. I'll do you the favor and just cut it off myself, because
Yeah.
I don't want to go through this process again. And thankfully, financially, this isn't something I need to do. And so, but that was weirdly empowering, the ability to just go,
No.
nah.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even cockiness. It was just like, and the minute I did it, Stacy, my wife, she was like, "Oh, I'm so glad you did that. Like,
Yeah.
your whole body, like, your attitude completely changed in a much better way. Like a much more, every time you would bring this thing up, your whole attitude would just sort of shift into this drudgery. You weren't enjoying it anymore.
Yeah.
Everything that they told you it was going to be at the start, it was no longer. So you made the right choice. So trying to get back to the actual question that the person asked, you need to be honest with yourself. You have to communicate, and there's a lot of self-analysis where you're like, is this a reasonable amount of work? Am I fulfilling the other obligations in my life, not just work obligations?
That's the important
The
one.
people in my life, the time that they deserve, the attention. And if you have a child, that child does not. I can negotiate with Stacy. I can't You can't negotiate with a puppy. You can't
No.
negotiate with a baby.
No.
And therefore, you have to have those priorities in mind. Those are responsibilities as much as well. And it's not easy, to make those choices. But the good thing is that the more honest you are with yourself and with the people you're working with, the easier it is to have that respect, that they trust that what you're telling them is the truth. That
Well,
when I
it's
say
it's
I can't
so
do
it's
this,
so important to have
yeah,
that relationship, like that's really I really believe in that. And it's like if you're being authentic, even
yep,
if you fall behind, there's going to be a lot more
yep,
understanding, when you
yeah,
do fail.
totally. I think one of the things that's most enjoyable for me right now, working on the Conan stuff with Heroic Signatures, is the editorial team and I get along really, really well.
And
Like
you can
we
tell,
get
man.
those calls.
You can tell in the comic.
Yeah,
You can see it.
yeah, the quality's there,
Yeah.
the excitement is there, and when we're brainstorming stuff, and I'm just like giddy on a Zoom call, and we finish up, and I'm like, wow, this is going to be so bonkers. I can't believe we're doing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is a great feeling. That's
Yeah.
the kind of creative collaboration that you sort of work your whole life for, and
Yeah.
you hope that you get to have those experiences. And a really good friend of mine, he was doing big two stuff at a very high end. I don't want to say who it is because it's not really fair. He's no longer doing that. When I was doing Avengers, we went out for lunch, and he said to me, he goes, please tell me you're having fun. I was like, dude, this is amazing. I'm working on this crazy Avengers event with Al Ewing and Mark Waid, and we're doing all this crazy stuff, and these artists are incredible, and and he goes, good, I'm glad. And I was like, why would you think I wouldn't? He goes, because I didn't. I was like, what do you mean? And he was working on really big characters.
Yeah.
And he goes, I was so worried about the next thing, or where this was going to position me for the next springboard of my career, and how I could be more successful or win awards or get, more money or leverage one publisher against another to get an exclusive, that in the moment I was writing some of my favorite things, I never enjoyed it.
Wow.
I was stressed. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was uptight. I read reviews obsessively and, all these things. And he goes, when you're in the midst of it, you have to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, it'll never get better. You know what I mean? Like, and what you think of as the upswing might be the peak. And so, if you're constantly, there's nothing wrong with striving for more.
No.
There's nothing wrong with having dreams, but make sure you carve out the time to really relish the successes you're having, even the little ones, in the here and now. One of my buddies, he brought over a self-published little book, and he was very kind of self-defacing about it. Like, oh, it's just a little stupid thing. I was like, no, you spent time on this. You lavished attention on it. You clearly made this for a reason.
Yeah.
Are you proud of it? He's like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, I'm proud of you, and this is really awesome.
Nice.
I was like, nothing compared to what you're doing. I was like, who gives a shit? Like, this is your cool thing that you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I'm doing is nothing compared to whatever Neil Gaiman's doing, or Robert Kirkman, or, friggin', I don't know, Gail Simone, and like, who cares? Like, it doesn't, you made this thing.
Yeah.
And in this moment, this is a really cool thing,
Yeah.
And so you have to celebrate those kind of successes, and you have to kind of shake off those failures and keep kind of moving, and realize when it's good, you're like, man, I want to keep this feeling going as long as possible. I would love to bottle this, but this too shall pass. Like, that's the statement. My wife and I have the thing. It's the most wistful. You can say it in the best way. Something terrible is happening, and you're like, this too shall pass.
That's great.
And then when things are really amazing, you say, this too shall pass. It will not always be this good. Make sure you hold it.
Yeah.
And enjoy it. The people you love, the things that you care about, they all change. And you will have new great moments, but you will have lows as well. Like relish those victories and shake off, that sadness. This too shall pass, man.
That's beautiful. I love
Thanks.
that, man. It's been that this went really quick. These calls have been going so quick. I feel like we just started. Man, it's really good to hear. I've been so proud of like the passion that you've put into your career, and I know for you to be honest about kind of that burnout. I think it's really important for people to realize, like you said, what we put online, and it's like,
sure,
it's like there's that one side, but then there's the personal side, and I really appreciate that you shared that struggle. And man, I'm really proud of you. The Conan stuff, I can tell you guys are all having a great time, and it's cool to see. Fun. Yeah, cool, man.
It's been a joy.
Well, what's up for the rest of the year before we wrap? What do you?
Literally next week I got a crazy week next week. So Conan number 8 comes out, which is the end of our second story arc, which has an insane cliffhanger on it that fans will hopefully rend their shirts and be like, what have you done? The new Savage Sword of Conan, I actually got a copy right here.
Oh,
so
dude,
this is the new
such a great idea.
Black and white magazine is back from the dead.
It's so awesome.
Can you believe it's 80 pages for $7.
So cool.
Crazy. It looks amazing. I'm so proud to be a part of that, and that's going to be coming out every 2 months.
Wow. Okay.
Year. I've got another Conan event book that we are launching at Free Comic Book Day that I'm very excited about, and then just conventions. I'm doing Emerald City Comic Con next week, and I'm so excited to see the Hyborian faithful kind of coming out of the.
That'll be fun, man.
At that show, I'm doing a panel that is becoming an annual tradition. Katie Cook and I do this panel called Convention Horror Stories.
Oh yeah, nice.
We tell our darkest, most terrible experiences at conventions, like a cathartic explosion of insanity that I'm really looking forward to doing.
Nice.
And then, yeah, more travel this summer. And I'm finally stepping away from teaching at the end of April. And so Stacey and I are celebrating by going to Japan.
Oh,
on an
congrats,
extended
man.
trip.
Well
And
deserved.
then I'm going to do a bunch of cons. It's going to be fun. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm really glad to have caught up with you. Thanks so much for hopping on and talking with us today. And yeah, let's stay in touch, man. I'm
That'd
gonna.
be amazing.
I'm always following you on Facebook. Yeah, I'm a quiet
Thank you.
creeper.
No, it's good. It's good, man. I love hearing it. So
All right, man.
good luck with everything. And good luck
Thanks.
with the rest of the day.
Cheers, brother.